This is Rabbi Azriel Rosner, and this is the fourth shiur of the series of shiurim about the Sheish Zechirot, the 6 things that we are obligated to remember every day. Today we're going to discuss the mitzvah of remembering what happened in the desert, in the Midbar, when Bnei Yisrael traveled from Mitzrayim to Eretz Yisrael. The pasuk in Dvarim, Perek Tet, pasuk Zayin, says, Zechor al tishkach et asher hiksafta et Hashem Elokecha b'midbar, lemin hayom asher yatzata me'eretz Mitzrayim, ad boachem ad hamakom hazeh. Remember, do not forget how you angered God in the desert from the day that you came out of the land of Egypt until you arrived in this place. This seems to be a very negative pasuk. It's remembering basically all the bad things that Bnei Yisrael did in the desert as they traveled from Mitzrayim to Eretz Yisrael. And we know that over the course of the 40 years in the desert, Bnei Yisrael made quite a few mistakes. What is the point of this memory? Why are we commanded to remember those 40 years in the Midbar every single day? So the Sforno on this pasuk really takes it kipshuto. He understands it very simply. Remember how many sins Bnei Yisrael did in the desert. Remember how you were an Am Kshei Oref, a stiff-necked nation, and you continued angering God time after time in the desert, complaining about water, complaining about the food, complaining about the traveling, Chet HaEgel, and finally Chet HaMeraglim. And really that is what we're supposed to remember according to the Sforno. And if so, then presumably the message of the pasuk is to remember all the sins of our ancestors in the desert so that we can take care not to sin like that again, so that we can learn from our ancestors' mistakes and learn the lessons of the Dor HaMidbar. However, there are other Mefarshim who understand this mitzvah of remembering differently, and I think in a more positive light. Specifically, I'd like to quote the Perush of the Or HaChaim, Rabbi Chaim ben Attar, on this pasuk, and coincidentally, the Or HaChaim's Yartzeit is this Thursday, so it's especially appropriate to be learning some of his Torah this week. Says the Or HaChaim, he notes that this pasuk of Zechor al Tishkach is in Sefer Dvarim. It's in the final speech of Moshe to Bnei Yisrael at the end of the 40 years in the desert. When they are right on the border of Eretz Yisrael, they're about to cross into Eretz Yisrael in just a short time. And part of Moshe's final speech to Bnei Yisrael is, remember how you angered God in the desert. Asks the Or HaChaim, what's the point of reminding Bnei Yisrael of this right then, as they enter Eretz Yisrael? If they're now good enough, if they're now, they've passed those sins, they finally are worthy of meriting Eretz Yisrael, so why remind them of the past? So the Or HaChaim gives a beautiful answer, and he says as follows. The reason to remember the past is because in the past they were rebellious. But says the Or HaChaim, even though Bnei Yisrael were rebellious in the desert so many times, and they complained about the water and the food and the traveling and so many things, but still Hashem took them towards Eretz Yisrael. They kept traveling. They kept going in the right direction. They kept going back to Eretz Yisrael. And remember, through that early years, even after Chet HaEgel, which was a terrible Avera, they were forgiven and they kept going to Eretz Yisrael. Says the Or HaChaim that this teaches us something very important and very significant. He writes that our connection to Eretz Yisrael, our zechut, our merit to Eretz Yisrael, doesn't come just because, we are worthy, we are great, we are virtuous. Says the Or HaChaim, Bnei Yisrael's connection to Eretz Yisrael comes from the Brit Avot, from the covenant, the agreement that Hashem made with our forefathers. And he promised them that we are going to go, we are going to inherit Eretz Yisrael. That promise of Hashem stands strong whether we make mistakes, which of course we do in every generation, or not. According to the Orach Chaim, what we learn from this pasuk of Zechor al Tishkach is remember that even though our ancestors sinned in the desert, they still kept heading towards Eretz Yisrael. That bond that they had in the desert to Eretz Yisrael was never completely broken. Yes, Bnei Yisrael sinned in the desert, Hashem is telling them, a lot. But still, you never lost out on the right to inherit Eretz Yisrael. You kept on going. And in fact, the only time when Bnei Yisrael were held up, were perhaps not going to merit Eretz Yisrael, was the Chet HaMeraglim, when the spies came back and Bnei Yisrael said, we don't want to go. And even then, let's remember, it was only a delay for 40 years, for a set amount of time. But still, they kept heading on the path towards Eretz Yisrael. The connection between Am Yisrael and Eretz Yisrael was never severed. And the Orach Chaim is really turning this pasuk on its head, not seeing it as a negative pasuk, oh, remember how bad you were, what a terrible thing. Rather, the Orach Chaim is seeing the positive side of the coin. Remember how even though when we make mistakes, even though we sinned, God still kept his connection with us alive and kept the connection to Eretz Yisrael and the promise of Eretz Yisrael. And that should really be for us nowadays a real nechama, a real sign of something that we can look forward to. That even though in these days we make lots of mistakes, everybody does. We make individual mistakes. We make mistakes as a community. But now, especially nowadays, that we have begun to return